Welcome to the Divine Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Foster, a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, and spiritual mentor, here to provide you with the next steps towards your dream reality, along with clarity and deep validation while on your spiritual journey. I have an immense passion for all things paranormal, spiritual, and of course, having some super fun chats with incredibly knowledgeable people. In each episode, we will expand our minds, ignite our inner psychics, embrace our spiritual awakening journeys, and live a super grounded, witchy life. I hope you learned something new in today's episode. Okay, hello, and welcome back to Divine Gossip. I have another amazing guest on. This is Jeff Byrd with me. He is a very close family friend of mine, of my mom's. I've known him for freaking years. How long have you known me, by the way? Since I was a
Since you
baby?
were one, yeah, you had just been born. I mean, when I first met Christy, she was riding around with a car seat in the back of her car.
Oh, yes, love that. So, Jeff is a speaker, trainer, and coach with a passion to uplevel corporate cultures. He's also just so knowledgeable. And this podcast actually came about. I asked you to be on my podcast because we were sitting at my mom's dinner table, and I think we were talking about like PTSD in the brain and how it shows up, and CPTSD and all of the complex nature of that. And I was like, wow, I could talk to you for hours about this. So I was like, why not come on the podcast?
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Can't wait for the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So let's dive in. I kind of want to have the listeners know more backstory about who you are and how you got here, and also kind of where you stand with spirituality slash religion, because I know it's like a very interesting path for you, and also it's a spiritual podcast. So I did want to add that in. But yeah.
Yeah, so that's been interesting. I'll start with the spiritual connection. So, I grew up in and talk about attachment style. So anxious attachment style was my thing. I learned anxious from my dad. I learned avoidant from my mom. So we'll dive into those. But so, I just felt like that I was never good enough. He was kind of like the God figure to me. He kind of represented that. And I later transferred that over to my perception of God. And it was like he's just always the little angry curmudgeon floating around by Andromeda, that's like always got a bad attitude and always finding fault and always judging you and always, almost like he liked to do that. And I was like, wow, that was a really hard image to deal with. So I was very, very rebellious. That led me into the whole addictive cycle, everything you could think of, drugs, alcohol. And that led me into what I was a real psychedelic kind of era. So that was interesting because I was trying to get as far away from God as I could. And I thought, well, I'll just have this experience that takes me as far away from him as I can. That didn't work. That ran me right into him.
Mm,
One of the writers, Solomon, when he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, he said, God has set eternity in their hearts. And so usually we're not conscious of that, but in a expanded conscientious state, it's like, oh, yeah, you did.
mhm.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
more incredible and beautiful than I could possibly imagine. So I was thinking about during this whole season, it's like I was like, wow, wow, wow. And then I started thinking about all the stories from church and school and Sunday school, whatever, that I'd heard about Jesus. And I was looking at that with new eyes, with like all of this all of the religious trappings and structure and, traditional things stripped off of that. And I was like, oh, they're the same one. He's that one. He's
Yeah.
the beautiful, the loving one, the gracious one. No wonder people followed him all over, because they're like, oh my, you're the truth. It's like we're looking all over. Nobody else is. And I was like, oh my gosh, all the rest of us are looking for something. He's the only whole one that's ever lived. And
Mhm.
so that led me, and then I was like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? So I thought, well, let me get involved in church. Maybe they just knew this, and I didn't realize it. No, they didn't. They didn't see that. They were just busy doing stuff. They had the same things that they were saying, but it just meant something completely different to me now. Even though they were using the same words. So I tried for 13 years just to do all this stuff. It's like, okay, Jesus died for you. Now roll up your sleeves and get busy and show him how much you love him. Like, let me go, 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 go. But it's like never enough. because I was still
Yep.
living out of that anxious attachment style of not being good enough. So eventually I just burned out. I was like, if one more person asked me for one more thing, you're going to see my picture up at the post office. It's like, I am just done. I am done. And so I just left all that. And I thought, well, I have failed miserably at that too, as I thought I had in so many other things. And so that just led into a whole new party era again. Had all these international friends. They were always over my house. We were just always partying down. And but eventually they dispersed. They went back home. That kind of died down. That whole lifestyle kind of died down. And I felt like, you know, there's something more for me here. I remember waking up in DC on a friend's couch one night with a really bad hangover and just kind of having the impression on my heart that this is not over yet. You
Yeah.
might feel like it's over, but like Churchill said, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but it might be the end of the beginning. And
Mhm.
so over many, many, many years, I mean, it's been a long process. What I feel like is God's been getting my heart back. And I look at this now and I'm like, this is not just a bunch of people doing stuff in a religious organization. It's like, forget about that. It's like, this is a love story. This
Yeah.
is a love story. This is the love that all our hearts and my heart had been wanting for all my life. And I had looked for it in so many other things. And that's why God says, don't do that because they're not going to ultimately fulfill you. It's like a lesser love. It's like who wants a bologna sandwich if you can have a prime rib steak dinner? It's like, but often we don't believe that there is a prime rib steak dinner for us. It's
Yeah.
been made out to look bad or something to be made so weird that we're like, well, I guess I'll just have the bologna sandwich because that's better than nothing. So we take a lesser thing when there's a much greater thing. So that is my story now, and just to share because I think this is really cool. I mentioned this that afternoon at the dinner table you were talking about, and it's like light. Okay, so Jesus says, "I'm the light of the world." Okay, now
Yeah.
light, the quantum physicist will tell us that light has a dual nature. It
Hmm.
acts both as a wave and as a particle. If
Okay.
you're not observing it, if there's no, and it can even be an inanimate, camera device or something to look at it, if there's nothing observing it, it acts like a wave. But as soon as any kind of observation device or a person is there watching it, it's like it knows and it changes and acts like a particle. And
Huh.
so what occurred to me is I'm like, okay, so Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. That doesn't mean that there's not this whole light up there that he's always calling the Father or the Spirit or something like that. This whole fabric of the universe and beyond, like we talked about the Akashic field, it's like, I think that's a spiritual reality, personally. And we can get into that if you want to. But
Yeah.
so, anyways, it's like, okay, so I took all of that uncreated beauty and goodness and light and love and mercy and empathy and all this stuff. And I think it's like it's a giant cosmic funnel that funneled all that down into one person.
Mm.
Says I'm the light of the world, and that person is Jesus. And your cross, this is interesting. I'm getting into a lot of stuff here, but your cross, people talk about, I used to read that verse, take up your cross and follow me. And I thought, wow, that just means, do a bunch of stuff that you hate. And but no, it's like your cross is the intersection between your true identity and a world that can't understand.
Mhm.
That's the actual intersection. So anyways, I see that now. I look at this life like the Matrix. If you remember those movies, those were so popular back in the day, and I love them. And it's like, so there's this little mental construct of what this life is that we think is real life, and it's just fake. It's just fake. It looks real, it tastes real, it feels real, but it's like this little teeny mental construct superimposed over this real life. Now, in the Matrix, it was kind of a wasteland, but in this world, I think it's this divine realm of beauty, of love, of grace, of compassion, of empathy, of forgiveness, of all these things that is the real world. And Jesus saying, I died to the one, to your little bitty life that you lived, thinking all this stuff was real and it informed you of who you are, your identity, and your worth. And then based on what you believed, you acted out of that. And I died to all that. That's gone. I'm taking that away so that I can establish you in this beautiful realm, this divine realm of light, of love, of all these incredible things. You're with me in that, and I'm never going to leave you. So that's kind of where I am now. So
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, isn't that amazing? It's like
Yeah,
you don't hear that in church as much, right?
right. A church is very much like you have to die for him or else you're a failure. Or like you're so right. Like it is that like all or nothing like ride or die. You know what I mean? Like you just have to be so perfect or else you're going to go to hell. Like that's what I thought religion was. And would you say that when you think of God and when people say the universe or God or your spirit guides or whatever term they use, do you think it's all the same thing? Like even with other religious gods, like do you think that's all the same, like universal energy?
Well, I think it's similar, and I think they're moving along some of the same lines. But I wrote down this one quote by the Dalai Lama, which really amazed me. And he said back in 2001, he said Jesus Christ also lived precious lives. So you see, he reached a high state, either as a bodhisattva or an enlightened person through Buddhist practice or something like that. Dalai Lama's quote. I'm like, so that does, my Muslim friends, they believe in Jesus. They believe he was a prophet. They believe he's coming back. So all of them have him as like a way. But then when you listen to Jesus, he says, I am the way. So
Mm,
it's like, I think many things that people are seeing are part of who he is. They've got part of the picture. So I think he's going, let's everybody get the whole picture of my heart. It's my heart. You've got part of that. Now, and when I think of the universe, so I think there are three heavens. Okay, like the Apostle
okay.
Paul said, he was third heaven. So the first heaven is where the birds fly and the clouds float. The second heaven is where the stars and galaxies soar, float around. The third heaven is that akashic field, that spiritual realm that's not on the time-space continuum. It is beyond that. All times are now. It's perfect. There is no darkness in that. And this whole universe and all that we know came from that. I
Mm,
believe it was created by that. The supreme being or God, if you want to call him that, or whatever you want to call him, created that out of that. And we're told, Bible says, Jesus spoke it. I'm like, wow, that would be cool if he's that one who is the supreme being of all that beautiful realm, and that's what we get forever. And he created all this. That's why we love it so much. That's why we love the birds and the flowers and the beach and the trees and the mountains and the desert. Is because it's like, wow, something of that reflects him. I was thinking, this just pops into mind. I was thinking about water one time. Water's so beautiful, it can be so destructive. But I thought, water always seeks the lowest place. And
mm,
when it gets to the lowest place, the sun shines on it and its state is transformed to go to the highest place. I thought that's amazing. It's like, okay, so so I think that's just a spiritual analogy. I think we have
yes.
all of these analogies in this created world around us that show us they're like a little taste, a little glimpse of a bigger reality. And so I think that many people are tuned into parts of that reality. Like the
Yeah.
Hindus in northern India, they worship like 10 million gods or something. Everything is a god. But what they're doing is they're seeing the divine imparted into every single thing, a grain of sand, a tree, a bird, a flower, or whatever. They're seeing that imparted there. So I think they're definitely on the right track.
Yeah.
They are seeing part of that much greater reality. And I think that it's really helpful, for us, and so much church is like this little teeny box of things. You got to get everything just right. And I'm like, why can't we sing and dance and have fun and create and do all this beautiful, wonderful stuff to be an inspiration and a blessing to each other? Why can't we do that and just be living in that love?
Mm,
That little boxy religious thing, which drives me crazy. But
yeah. I know I love everything you're saying because it I think I agree with everything you're saying, but I think what's cool is I'm definitely not educated on the Bible. So I love bringing people on like you who are educated in the Bible and have such a cool perspective. And I think that I had a question I freaking forgot. Anyway, I appreciate you being very honest about what you believe. And I think it's very good for people to hear because in the spiritual space and everyone I bring on, they're not very religious. Like you're just spiritual and like that's your label. And um I think it's cool. But I was gonna ask, I remembered my question now. I was gonna ask because I'm not educated on the Bible and I'm sure it says it somewhere and I haven't read it, but why is Jesus the one? Why is he the human to be all of this? You know what I mean?
Well, I guess for one thing, he said he was. Nobody else ever claimed that. And
Oh,
second, And second, he was seen by like a ton of people after he came back from the dead. Everybody else is still dead. So it's, I mean, that's kind of powerful. Plus, I mean, just the miracles themselves. I mean, he said, if you don't believe me for my words, believe me because of the things I do. I'm doing stuff that nobody else does. I'm
Right.
raising the, I'm healing the blind, I'm healing the deaf. It's like lots of people have lots of different opinions, but they don't do that.
Right. Right. I love that. Yeah. Um, well, I let's just dive into attachment styles, I guess. Do you want
Okay,
to do
sure,
that?
sure. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
Because I'm glad we talked about that first so that your perspective is really shown. I appreciate you being very honest because it's very brave because a lot of people who talk about God and Jesus are not given a platform because, there's all of this uh, I guess image of religious people that are or stereotypical, I guess you could say ish, of them being homophobic or all of this transphobic, all of this stuff when it's like talk to the person first and see if, just because they believe in God doesn't mean that they're shutting people out. You know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah, and for just on that, and then we'll get into the attachment style. For people of any persuasion, I'm like, what are you really looking for? What is your heart really craving? Because all of us at the deepest parts, we are craving to be cared for, to be loved, to be healed, to belong. And that gets into the attachment styles. And so I'm like, depending on what we've come up with, what our environment was like, what part of society we were in, what our role models were like, we might look for different things. We might think that that love is in this place or that place or the other. And so everything becomes understandable.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean agree with it, but when I understand it, I can have empathy, I can have compassion, I can care for the person. I don't have to agree. I mean, I don't agree with myself half the time, but I don't agree with everybody, but on everything. And I'm like, well, that might not be the best way. I mean, there's a way things work. Like I don't, you don't nail a nail with a banana. It's like that's not going to work. It's like you got to have a hammer to nail a nail. So it's like there are certain ways things come out, have a best result, but anything, I just try to understand, just understand, go, okay, what is informing this choice? What's behind that? What are they really looking for? What's the why there? So, and then when I get to that, I'm like, okay, now I can have some understanding and some empathy for myself. I mean, my gosh, I got to do that for myself. There's so many of my life choices as well as other people. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. If everyone had that perspective, there would be a lot more peace in the world, that's for sure.
Amen to that. But even when I go in churches, I don't really feel like I fit because I'm coming with a perspective that doesn't fit in the little box of things. I mean,
Yeah.
even that Angie, my wife, that Angie and I found now we really like that. But what we really like is a lot of the people we're meeting. We are having some good connections with good-hearted people, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of the structure. It's like, yeah, you can take that or leave it or whatever. That I don't really resonate with a lot of the things they do like that with the structure, but it's like the people, the hearts of people, and they're coming from all kinds of backgrounds and persuasions. But it's like I get to know the people. What a joy.
Yes, absolutely. So, can you
Okay.
explain what are attachment styles? Like, what are the different types, and how can each one show up in our day-to-day lives?
Okay, yes, I can. So attachment style is just basically, really simply, how did you learn to attach to people? And usually that starts at home. And some people, I mean, they come out of what looks like a really wonderful family and they do like things that like really make you wonder. It's like, what? I know one family, and one sister is like this little model person, and the other person is like this real defiant person. Like I think she has oppositional defiance disorder, but it's a ODD real thing. And so, it's like, well, how did that happen? But usually if you look at the environment and the role models that people came from, you can see how they've attached to it. For people who had an alcoholic parent, and maybe, a dad who was alcoholic and would just get really angry when that happened, they're going to be very anxious. They are going to have an anxious attachment style because they got all this anxiety. It's like, well, when's the other shoe going to fall? Okay, maybe dad was in a good mood sometimes when he was sober, but then when's he going to go on a bender again? And when's he going to be mad? And when's he maybe going to be abusive or something? It's like, so there's this anxiety, that there's this instability, this unsettledness. Or maybe somebody was raised in a really wonderful, nurturing home where they were free to be themselves and pursue their interest, and people celebrated them. They didn't try to force them into what they wanted for them. Um, I had one young friend that she was getting married, and she hired me to be a photographer back when I was doing wedding photography, like I did for your mom. And I went to meet with her just to get her to walk me through the wedding and see what she wanted, what she was really looking for. And when we met and I started asking her these questions, she said, she said, you are the only person that's asked me what I wanted for my wedding. Everybody else has
Aw.
told me for my wedding. So it's like, wow, just honoring somebody else. I mean, that creates a real relaxed style. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm loved for who I am. I don't have to fit into somebody else's mold in order to, it's very conditional love, and conditional love is no love at all. So attachment style is really, back to your question, is just how you learn to attach to people. And then of course that often carries over into other relationships, even though they're not like the initial relationship, but you are carrying the information from the initial relationship into your other relationships.
Yes, absolutely. So I do want to get you don't have to share anything personal if you don't want to, but I do, just as examples for listeners, because my dad did used to be a heavy drinker, and he would get very aggressive. Although when I turned and I am a very anxious person. So when you said that, I was like, "Er." But it's okay now, because when I turned like, I would say like 15, 16, he actually, I don't know if I should say this. I probably won't say that part, but he healed a lot. And he actually provides probably the utmost safety to me ever. And it's been so healing for me. And he's actually, like, righted his wrongs and apologized to everyone he hurt. And yeah, it is wonderful. And so it's interesting because I do think like people who grew up with that kind of parent, there is still hope, I guess I wanted to say, like people can heal from their attachment style.
Absolutely. I got a friend, and his email is his name at or is better as possible. That's his email title. And I'm like, that is the truth. Better is possible because, whatever, even if we had an addictive personality, I mean, I used to drink a lot up until about going on 4 years ago, but it's like, why? Why did I drink? Why did I get angry? What did I want, or what was I afraid of not having, or what,
Yeah,
understanding those things, and then we can have forgiveness. That's why I believe, the spirit of the universe, the spirit of God, of Jesus, is forgiveness. It's like, okay, I'll take all of that, the person you were, the factors that informed you, and the way you thought about it on your own, and what you decided to do. I take all of that. I'm taking all of that out of the way. I'm killing it. I'm burying it, and I'm coming out without it. And you're coming with me. And I'm
yeah,
like, get better. We can enter a new realm. We can have a new mental construct of what life and love is like. Our life.
absolutely. Yes, yes. And even in my relationship now, we've been in May, it'll be 3 years. So like my longest relationship ever. I still get anxious. So like if we argue a little bit, I'll be like, "Oh my God, like he's gonna break up with me and like leave me," and like all these. Like I used to spiral in the beginning of our relationship, but since he has provided me that safety again of being like, "No, I'm not that kind of person," it's also healed that kind of anxious thing about myself. And I think it's also interesting how people can come into our lives and heal that about us. You know what I mean? Like there's people that can really like counteract that and then reteach your brain like, oh, not everyone is like this, you know?
Amen. And as you're saying that, you remind me of a book I read one time by a rancher who had adopted a dog, and the dog had been abused, and it was so scared of people. It wouldn't let him come near him, would just always eat his food alone and whatnot, and just didn't want any interaction. And then after some time in that different environment, he started to learn to trust. He started opening up, and he became like this really beloved family pet. But it's like it took a little while.
Mhm.
It's like he had been so tuned into that old dynamic that he didn't trust the new dynamic. And then eventually, as he really came to trust the new dynamic, as it was stable for him, then he just dropped all of those defense mechanisms and came to be a real part of the family.
Yeah, I love that. So, with the different types of attachment styles, there's anxious and avoidant, right? Like, what are the names for them?
Okay, so let me give you the main four. So the
Okay.
one that we want is secure,
Yes.
and then there's anxious, and then there's avoidant, and then there's disorganized. That's like a
Oh,
roll.
okay.
You're up and down. So I can kind of break them down a little bit if you want to give like a little overview. So balanced means that you're not bringing a lot of emotional baggage to the relationship.
Mm,
The goal is, like a friend of mine says, don't react emotionally, but respond strategically. So you're able to see past the emotions that would cloud your vision and make you act out or withdraw or whatever, so that you can actually see what's going on and have a a wise, strategic response to it. Okay, that's
interesting.
the balance. That's what we all want, and what a lot of us don't have, but we're working towards. Then the anxious is like we talked about. You're sure something bad is going to happen. It's I like to say it's like the sky is always falling. It's going to be so bad when it does. It's going to be so heavy to put it back up. It's like this forecast of dismal forebodings. All these bad things are just always going to happen. Now, usually they don't. Once in a while, we might have something bad happen, but usually most of the things that we're so afraid of and so sure are going to happen don't. But
Yeah.
it's like we always feel that way. The anxious person always feels that way. Then the avoidant. Avoidant is interesting because I had this on part of my family with my mom, and that was you just avoided things. If it was an issue, you didn't talk about it. You didn't want to bring up anything that might be uncomfortable. So you just avoided it. You just bottled it. You just stuffed it. You didn't do anything that might rock the boat. Sit down, Jim. You're rocking the boat. That was kind of our motto. It was scary to talk about any of those things, and it was very uncomfortable. It was like, and part of that goes into the people pleasing thing. We'll get to. It's like I've got to have this other person happy with me, even if it means denying who I really am and what I really feel and what I really think. I just
Hmm.
don't bring it up because I don't want to trouble the relationship, and I feel like I need this relationship to be in place. Even if it's bad, at least I need it to be intact rather than just blown up.
Yeah.
Um, that's that, and then the disorganized. The disorganized is really confusing, I think, and I can see a little bit of that in my history too. Disorganized is kind of the roller coaster. It's like you really want to be close to people, you want to have deep, meaningful, significant relationships. So you're trying to reach out, but at the same time, you're withdrawing because you're afraid of that. You're afraid that's not going to be what happens. If they really get to know you, they're not going to want that. They're going to withdraw. So sometimes you just save yourself the trouble and you just withdraw first.
So it's
uh,
like self-sabotage.
it's very sabotaging, and it can be other sabotaging too, because if I'm convinced that I'm going to be rejected, I might actually develop a stance of rejecting the other person.
Right.
And I might hurt the other person just to keep from being hurt, which is really backward and confusing for everybody involved, but that can really happen too.
All right. Wow. That's a lot. But I also hear
We're
like, what'd you say?
complex people.
Yes, very multifaceted. Um, there is like I hear online a lot, there's anxious avoidant. Like they put the two together. Is that a thing?
Oh, sure. Because yeah, it doesn't mean that we're not trying to stick people in a box and say they're only one type of thing. There can be multiple combinations, especially when it comes to anything but the secure. Like I think I'm anxious avoidant. I see parts of it as organized. I mean, it's almost like pick an episode in my life and see what was predominant then, because we can certainly just like in the personalities. Remember when we did the personality testing with your mom's company and then you were involved? It's like very, very rarely are people just one personality style.
Yes.
I'm three of them. A lot of people are two or three of them. So it really depends on the setting. Like a friend of mine, she's usually she's a colleague that does this too, the testing, and she's usually a D, which is the dominant personality. They're like, get it done, let's make it happen. They're comfortable in leadership. But when her sister was on hospice, she was an S, a stable one. She wanted to bring stability and comfort and care to the situation. So a lot of it depends on what our circumstance is. That's how we present.
Mm-hmm. When we did that, was my mom, what was that? A peacemaker? Is that what she was?
Peacemaker. She's an SC. She's a peacemaker. And
I
and
remember
it's huh? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I remember getting the same exact result and everyone was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm very similar to my mom. No one realizes it."
Well, you really are. You were both peacemakers. I remember that because I mean, Christy was surprised when I pointed that out to her too. I'm like, Max, the same thing as you, same personality type. Now, the one difference is, I shouldn't really be telling her stuff, but she knows, and we talk about it in the group anyways. But my wife does it too. But it's like, so they have this basic thing, but then in the public arena, we have three
Yes.
graphs, right? There's the core graph, and then there's the public graph, which are my favorite too. So I'd like to see the changes. And some people in the public arena, they think that what is wanted is for them to be an influential, fun, high-spirited kind of personality, the life of the party personality. And so they push that I up. And I think I had this conversation with your mom one time. I said it's almost like you have to bench press that because you
Yeah.
think that's what people want. And you're afraid that if you let that down, they won't like what you really are. But what she really is a very high C, which is compliant. That means she gets stuff done right. She
Mm-hmm.
wants a bulletproof product. She wants to dot the I's and cross the T's and pick the right colors and do everything. So when she's marketing for people and branding for them, she gets the product right, which is super important in her line of work.
Yes.
And she does it because she's also got the S. The S I see is like a big heart. They're the most caring, empathetic, loyal. They don't care about the spotlight. They just want to make sure everybody's good and stable. So that you're the same thing. It's I'm sure you have an attention to detail, but at the end of the day, what you want is just stability for people. You're wanting people to be good. You want good for you. You just want stability. You don't want that anxious thing to come in there, and you want to spread that to other people so that they can be like, let's everybody just take a deep breath. Pressure's off. We're good.
Yes.
We're just,
That is literally why I love my job, is so that when I'm in readings with people and I read them like a book and I'm like, no, I know exactly what you're going through, and I give them advice on it, they're like, oh my God, you actually understand me. That's so nice. And they can just they can just relax. And I'm like, yes, relax. Like I got you. It's so nice. What is the test we're talking about for listeners?
oh, okay. So I'm a Maxwell method of DISC. DISC is a personality test. So I'm a trainer and a consultant. So D is dominant, I is influential, S is stable, and C is compliant. So it's interesting, especially with teams, to find out who is what, and then to see how to put those teams together so that you're not fighting with each other. You're complementing each other. You're bringing your strengths to complement each other's strengths, and where they're lacking, you might have something. So you're working together.
I love
Teamwork.
that.
So I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do. Just because it's nice to be understood. I've gone into communities before and just went through their reports, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like you've been reading our mail. It's like you've
Yes.
never met us before and you know all this stuff about us. It's almost scary accurate. And so it's like, but it's neat to know that you can understand each other. Angie and I, my wife, use our discs all the time to help understand each other and go, okay, how do I need to approach this person? How do I need to understand that what's making them tick? So understanding, and I've got a friend that's also a trainer, Maxwell trainer over in Dubai, and she does all kinds of training throughout the Middle East. And one of the biggest things she does is help people with forgiveness because there's so much, as you know, horror going on over there, and there's so much people need to work through forgiveness on. And she said that understanding is the basis of forgiveness. So
Yeah.
if you can understand where a person's coming from and really put that now with some of those things going on, it's gonna take a special touch and some just divine help and grace to ever be able to forgive. But because there's so many horrors that have gone on. But it's under getting in the other person's shoes, even in families and stuff. Like one of the things that helps me forgive with things that were offensive with my parents is getting in their shoes and seeing where they were coming from. They weren't bringing that to the table. All I saw was their reaction to it. They were reacting emotionally, not responding strategically. And so when I see where they were coming from, they're like, oh, that's where they were coming. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were having their own inner battle, and that's why they acted the way they did. And so it's a lot easier to forgive and go, okay, I love you. I just want, even though they're gone, it's like, I love you. I want the best for you. I totally get it, why that was that way, and I completely forgive it.
Yeah, that's incredible. I agree with everything you said. I have nothing to add. That was perfect. Um, okay, so I guess we kind of did cover how they can show up in our day-to-day lives, but it's more they definitely show up in relationships, obviously.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so is there anything else you want to add about how can people start being aware of how they attach to other people?
So, wow, it's well, how do you feel around them? Are you anxious? I mean, and one of the great things to ask other people is, what do you think? What's it? Well, John Maxwell often says in a corporate setting, what's it like on the other side of the table from me? You can ask other people, what's it like being around me? What do you
Yeah.
think? What's missing? How can I improve? It's like, usually if we sincerely ask people those questions, they will tell us. They will help us, and then we can have some meaningful conversation. We can all help each other if we're open to that rather than going, no, I've got it all together and I'm not open to anything. And then that's a bad way to be. I can't learn anything that way. I can't ever possibly stand to improve. So I gotta crack that door a little bit, crack that hard shell and be a little bit vulnerable and be like, okay, how would you like to see me improve? I remember a radio show I listened to back in the day, and they had surveyed a bunch of kids, and they said, "What are the things you would most like to see in your dad?"
Oh,
And the
wow.
the top two responses are, "I wish he wouldn't get angry, and I wish he would admit it when he's wrong." That was what kids wanted to see in their parents. So I mean, it's like, boy, if we could have that conversation, without any anger, without any judgment, just an open, vulnerable, humble stance, we could have a lot more openness and a lot deeper intimacy and love and affection and just peace in our relationships.
Yes, I applaud that with my parents. After years of me growing up just being such a communicator, obviously I have a freaking podcast now and I communicate in my sessions all the time. But so I just grew up being so like, why is that? Why do you feel this way? Why? Like, just tell me more because I was always so curious. And I applaud my parents now. And of course, emotions get in the way sometimes. We're human, but my parents have always been so good at just talking about it with me, and especially my dad now, he'll explain his thoughts and the reasons he said no, or like the reasons he's so stubborn in this form and in this situation. And then my mom and Keith, we just had a conversation the other day about like something they did that hurt my feelings, and little did I know they did that because I hurt their feelings. And it's like, if we just talk it out, it's like, oh, we can understand each other. It doesn't have to be this big, huge fight of insane emotions.
Yes, and just to piggyback on that, I don't know if you know the Gottman Institute, but Dr. Gottman, who founded the institute, it's all about relationships and marriages and whatnot. And he said that if you've got a situation where two people are just unmovable, it's like they're just bumping fists with each other. He said if you can stop and you can open those fists and disclose what's inside, informing that, and you can understand that with each other, then you can have some real depth of intimacy and understanding.
Yes. So I think when people are in relationships and they are noticing that they're avoiding conflict, or they're holding it in and not communicating well, or they're communicating overly in an anxious way of like being so paranoid and having those trust issues, the most important thing we can do is talk about it. You think?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, find out what's inside informing that. I always look at, and I do this little thing to go, this is the surface. It's like the wind blowing on the water. This is the surface ripples in the water. But what's underneath at the heart level that's informing those surface opinions and actions?
Yes.
Forget about it. Everybody goes through life, it seems like fighting everybody else's opinions and actions. Forget about that. Find out why that's there. Find
Mm,
out what's going on at the heart level. And now you can have some heart communication.
absolutely, because there's an underlying reason for every emotion. Even we can express anger, and it could be actual like hurt. It's not actually anger. You know what I mean? Isn't that a thing? Like anger is not real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like Yoda. What was his famous quote in Star Wars? Like, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to the dark side. But yeah, a lot of times under anger there is a fear. And I think one of the best questions that I've ever seen is, in a group or anything else, it's just like, what are you really afraid of? Are you afraid that somebody's not gonna like you, or are you afraid that you gotta have everybody's approval? Are you afraid that you're not gonna be okay, that things aren't gonna work out? What are you afraid of? Because a lot of times those things turn into anger.
Yeah.
If I really need somebody too much to like me or approve of me and then they don't, I might get mad at them. When what I really am is I'm just hurt because that fear looks like it's coming true.
Yes, absolutely. So, how can, other than communicating, what else can you think of for people trying to heal into a secure attachment style? How can people start shifting their energy into like, oh, I can just be neutral and normal and strategic about my way of emotions and stuff.
Well, one thing I think that is a big deal is that often we are that attachment style because we developed it in the past, but we've carried it into the present. So we're not aware of those emotional stances and we're not fully in the present. So one thing that's really helpful, this is good with anxiety attacks too, panic attacks, is deep breathing. Deep breathing helps. And not just breathing, that's an easy thing to do. So I mentioned it first, but anything that ties me into the moment. So I can get out of my head, so to speak, that's in that past moment. And I'm just replaying those old tapes, those old messages over and over. I want to break out of that and get into the moment. I want to have patience with myself. Go, okay, listen, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built day by day. This is something I might be working on for a while, depending on how tied I was to those old hurts, and then to just becoming self-aware, and taking time, having some margin time. If I'm just like in a flurry of busyness all the time, I don't really have time to work through those things, to replace those with good healing, almost mindfulness practices of like, what's the good that I've been given in the moment? And I can easily turn those into gratitudes and go, oh, so that's right. And sometimes I've been having a bad day and I'll pull out a piece of paper and just start writing down gratitudes, like little things. I mean, they seem little, but they're not really little. And by the time I get to the end of the page, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm in a completely different place because I
Yeah.
noticed all these things that are right in my momentary environment. They're not in this negative headspace that's
Yeah.
based on past or my either in my past or my fear of the future, neither of which are right now. Right now, I'm okay. And I've got good stuff around me and there's good people around. And I'm grateful for that. So really trying to tune into what's going on at the moment. And often deep breathing is like the first thing I do. I love deep breathing because it really can center you and ground you. And then start tying in other things. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? What's beautiful around you? What are you grateful for? I've got food in the house. I got a refrigerator to house the food. I got a kitchen to house the refrigerator, and so forth and so on. It's like start listing those things and just get into the space you're in and out of that headspace.
Yeah, it's about and I worked through. I'm so sorry if you guys hear my cat. He's having a ball on his cat tree, and he it's not he. I worked with my spiritual coach and healer on this. I was attaching a lot of old stories to my present. And so if we're self-aware of those old stories that we still hold, and then we bring ourselves back into the present moment, it's like, oh, those things aren't true anymore. I don't need to attach myself to those stories. They're not useful anymore.
Exactly. And that's like what we were talking about that day at the table when we talked about the PTSD style in the brain. So the anxiety center of the brain, the thalamus is lit up, the basal ganglia, the emotional centers of the brain are lit up, and the sorry for the big term, but it's called the anterior cingulate gyrus. It's this little part in the front of the brain, and it's the brain's gear shifter. If that's lit up and overactive, you can't shift to another thought. You just keep replaying those anxious, emotionally loaded thoughts over and over and over. And that's really what PTSD is. That's why, mindfulness is like, okay, what happened then was bad, but that's not what's happening now. Let's get into what's happening now. Let's breathe in the air that's right here now. Let's do something cool. Let's plant a garden. Let's have an activity. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a cup of coffee. Whatever it is that's appropriate. It's like let's get into the moment that we're actually in and realize that what's past, it was difficult, it was horrible, but it's past. It's not right now. It doesn't rain every day, and I don't need to bring that rainy day into my present day with me. I can realize that it's there and that it was hurtful, and then start working through some of those emotions that I thought about it. What did it trigger in me? What did it bring up? And then this one psychologist that I came across while I was kind of researching some things for this, she said, I don't look for trigger moments. I look for glitter moments. What are the opposite of the trigger moments? What are the things that are beautiful, that bring joy, that bring peace, that bring love? What are those good things, those good graces that have come into my immediate moment that I can be grateful for?
Oh, I love that so much. That's incredible. I'm gonna write that down. And it shifts your mindset. And then do you agree that like, obviously our brain is a muscle, it can be trained. And like if you continue to shift into positivity and gratitude, you can kind of retrain your brain to stop going to those past stories. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. It's called neuroplasticity,
Yeah.
which was just a big word that means that we can get a different brain. We're not stuck with the brain we've got. we can retrain it, we can supplement it, we can put in good things in our diet, in our exercise. We can do all kinds of good things for our brain, and then we can rewire it. And killing your ants, which stands for automatic negative thoughts. Dr. Amen, that I do brain health training with, he says that in every patient that enters the door of his clinics, he takes them through ant therapy. And that's regardless of what their condition is. Everybody needs, nobody ever took a course in how to think more negatively. We're all born with like an honorary PhD in that, right? So we
Yes.
need to learn how to replace those automatic negative thoughts with a different way of thinking, and don't let them run away with us. Talk back to them and talk some truth to it. You don't have to do toxic positivity, but you can at least talk some truth to them. It's like, they may tell me, oh, you're a failure. Well, I do fail sometimes, but sometimes I succeed. So that's not true. That's not always true. I'm not a failure. Failure is an event, not a person. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like, you got to learn to talk back reality to those negative thoughts. And ask, ask yourself, I'll just talk about that, but ask, are you sure when you have a negative thought? Am I sure that, whatever this next presentation I've got is going to go bad? Are you sure? Are you 100% sure? Who are you with this thought? Well, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm whatever. Who would you be with a different thought? Well, I'd be happy, I'd be optimistic, I'd be looking forward to it, I'd be joyful, well, what's the other thought? What's the opposite of the thought you're thinking? Let's like start marinating on that thought, and, developing that, and let it have its outcome and its effects, rather than the negative thought that we're predisposed to think.
That is extremely helpful. That automatic negative thoughts, is that what ANT stands for?
Exactly.
That is a game changer. I didn't even know there was a name for that, but that's what I had to heal from after my entire childhood. Not that it's my parents' fault at all or anything like that. It's just we're predisposed to it. Like you said, just being born, we're automatically looking for what can go wrong as a survival and protection for ourselves. So that's really cool that there's a literal term for that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think that it's neat that he uses it. I mean, he's a double board certified psychiatrist, and he has clinics all over the country and whatnot. And so I'm just really privileged to be a trainer with him. But it's like he realized that this is all of my patients. What had happened, I'll tell you the story real quickly, is he had a really bad day at work. He had like two suicidal patients, two couples that hated each other, and a couple of other difficult scenarios. So he got home and he was like, when you shut the door and you hear the lock clicking, you're like, okay, good, all that's out there. And then he realized that his house had been invaded by ants. So he was going through the very unpleasant task of cleaning up the ants and getting rid of them, which you never feel good killing them, but you can't let your house be taken over. So, and then he realized, this is like the minds of my patients. They have been invaded with these automatic negative thoughts. And they're believing them. They're not talking back to them, they're believing them. And that's why they're making such bad decisions for their life, their relationships, their mental health, everything as a result. So that's why he started teaching everybody about killing the ants. And that's a whole presentation I've got. We can do that someday if you want to.
Yeah, heck yeah. That and story is like I feel like so divinely guided that there was ants and that analogy just came up. That is really cool.
Yeah. And so back to the whole matrix thing. I think that living in the matrix is where the ants are. That little matrix construct is where all the ants exist. They don't exist outside the matrix, but as long as I'm living in that, and until some light breaks through into that darkened place, I've got dark thoughts. I've got bad thoughts. That's
Mhm.
why I'm born that way. That's why we're all born that way. We all, in my opinion, we all inherited it from our forebears all the way back to Adam and Eve. They
Yeah,
started letting in some negative thinking and decided they were going to run with that and not the positive thinking and the true thinking. And so that's just come to all of us, and that's why it's natural. We're born that way. Nobody has to take a class. We've all got it in spades.
exactly. And I think that's important to say because with attachment styles and you realize, oh my God, I'm so anxious, or oh my God, I'm avoiding stuff, the way you think and the way you act in your relationships, it sometimes doesn't have to be anyone's fault. It's just how you do things as a human being.
Spirit of the world that we're born in.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm
So
ready for a movie.
yeah, I want
World,
to
world and spirit. I mean,
right. I want to change gears to people pleasing.
oh yeah, that's true. I was just thinking about that.
Do you have time still? I know we're almost
Oh,
an hour.
absolutely. And I'm just flipping through my pages so I can get back to the
Okay.
list.
Okay, cool, cool. Okay, so yes, let's talk about people pleasing because I think these sometimes can go hand in hand, obviously. Can you give us kind of a definition of people pleasing and like how it can show up and what it means and all that?
Okay, I can. The first thing I want to explain, though, is you have to understand locus of control. Do you have an external or an internal locus of control? Meaning, are you dependent on the things and people around you that controls your happiness, your contentment, your feeling okay? Or is that coming from the inside, regardless of the circumstances around you?
Mm,
Now, most of us have an external locus of control. If so and so would just act this way or treat me this way, if this circumstance would happen, if the interest rates would fall, if inflation went down, if whatever, fill in the blank of what you think in your environment could change to make you happy, then you have an external locus of control if that's what you're doing. Versus, are you happy, period, and you hope things might work out the way you want in the environment or people will treat you a certain way. But even if they don't, you're still going to be happy, still believing that good's going to come out of it. Looking at any situation is that there's something good that can be found in this. I mean, even like I think about Candace Lightner. She's the mother who founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Her 13-year-old daughter was killed by a drunk driver, and instead of just being in grief for the rest of her life, she took that tragedy and turned it into something that saved hundreds of thousands of children's lives and has branches in all 50 states and Canada. So she took that thing. So it's like she had an internal locus of control. She wasn't just going to be totally wiped out by the negative environment or the negative situation. She was going to do something inside. She would believe that she could find a way and she was going to look through it and figure out what she could do to make a difference in light of that. So with people pleasing, we are believing that if we're a people pleaser, we are believing that our happiness, our well being, our contentment rests on our external circumstances, specifically what people think of us. And so we're constantly doing all these things to try to get them to like us, to affirm us, to approve of us, to whatever, so that we can feel we're okay. So there's a number of ways we do that. I mean, I made a list of them. I got this from Psych to Go, but I made a list there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all of those are true, but they all harken back to that initial premise there that we're depending on the external circumstances and specifically the people and how they treat us to be okay. And so we created a very dependent situation.
yup, yup.
So
So
you want me to run through them?
yeah, I was literally just gonna ask you what are those? Let's do
Oh,
it.
okay, yeah, sure. So the first one is you over apologize. Now, I'm not saying that when you do something wrong or hurt somebody, you shouldn't apologize. But what I'm saying is, if you've ever been around a person who just needlessly apologizes, it's almost like they're apologizing for taking up space on the earth and breathing the air. It's
Yeah.
like it's like you have a right to that. You are just as important as everybody else. You don't have to apologize for that. So if people are just like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and it's not things that they actually did wrong. It's just like things they didn't have any control over, but they're sorry about it. And it's not like I'm just sorry that you're in that situation. It's like I'm personally sorry. It's like almost like I did something to put you in that situation, even though you didn't. So over apologizing is the first one. A person who over apologizes carries excessive guilt. There may be something that they really do have some guilt for in the past that they need to resolve and make amends and take some ownership of. But then often they're like little false guilts. Instead of getting to the
Mhm.
big thing that's in the background, there'll be all these little things that were like, oh, I feel guilty about this and this and this and this. And so we apologize too much. So
That's
that can
I was just gonna say, Cody and I, my boyfriend and I, literally will catch each other if we're apologizing for no reason. You're like, hey, don't apologize. You're not doing anything wrong. Let's stop that. So we've been really catching each other on that because we have those tendencies. So I relate to that. Yeah.
well, good. And y'all are both aware of that and helping each other get better. So that's a good thing. Um, the second one, and I think a lot of us can relate to this, is you have difficulty saying no. We just want to say yes, especially when we know that that's the expected answer. And that was one of the things that led to my burnout and like religious burnout is because it's just like everything seemed like a good thing. Well, yes, it's almost like, well, why are you so glad you're here? There's almost 8 billion people waiting for you. And so everything's a good thing. Helping people is a good thing, but you can't do it all. So saying yes to everything is a bad thing. You can be saying yes to other things. And what it really is saying no to yourself and to your needs and to your self care and your margin time. You're just cramming every minute trying to do something for everybody else because, if you're a gifted person and you're a kind person, then you'll just be asked for everything. And so you
That's me.
have the healthy boundaries and some good self-care. I mean, pick and choose what you're going to be involved in and feel good about what you do. Don't feel bad about the other 10,000 other things you're not doing. Go, okay, I can't do them all. Just like the starfish story, that the kid was walking down the beach with all these stranded starfish and he was throwing some of them back into the sea, the ones he could. And somebody came along and said, you can't ever make a difference to all these starfish. Look at how many there are. And he tossed one in the sea and said, I made a difference to that one.
Period. Yeah, I totally relate to that, especially if you are so giving naturally and compassionate and empathetic and you want to give, give, give. But at some point, it's like you got to put yourself first. Eventually, I literally, I think I officially broke that habit of being scared to say no. Like about a year ago, I noticed it and I was like, literally making myself miserable by saying yes to things I don't want to do, and it's draining the fuck out of me. So I just started saying no, and I eventually got over the feeling bad of saying no. So that's cool. Love
Right,
that.
right, and you might be this way, but if you're like me, it almost gets to the point where you say no just for fun, just because it's like you just say no to everything, and then eventually I started that way after a while because I was so burnt out. But then now I'm to the point where it's like, okay, it's okay to say yes to some things, but not to everything. Just because somebody expects it, that does not make it my obligation.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
can be disappointed, and they're going to have to live with that disappointment because I'm not doing everything they want and just wiping myself out as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, and that I see here. I like down here. We got to prioritize our own needs and put that above our desire to be liked and approved of by just wiping ourselves out to try to take care of everybody else.
Absolutely.
So the third one is you feel the need to agree with everybody. You don't ever want to have an opposite opinion, a dissenting voice. Not that you need to be mean about it, but somebody told me years ago. They said kindness and firmness are not antithetical. You can have a firm conviction, value, opinion, whatever, but you don't have to be ugly about it. You can
Mhm.
be kind. Kind actually comes from the root word that means helpful, to be of use. It comes from an old Hebrew word that means the flow of a mother's milk to her newborn child. It's good for nurturing, for growth, for development. So it's like giving something that can be helpful and useful to somebody, and you can be firm about that and still kind. You can be helpful and go, no, this is where I'm coming from, this is where I am, this is my this is where I am right now. Maybe I'll grow out of it, maybe not, maybe I'm right where I need to be. But so sometimes it's like, when there's an appropriate not everything needs to be spoken out on, but you don't have to share everything you think. But when it's appropriate, sharing your thoughts, your truth, your reality, your perspective, your current stance, doing that, and then speaking your mind when appropriate. So that's that one. Flip the page here. So number four, and this is a really dangerous one, I think, is I can look at the places in my life where I've done that, and it is not good. But you change for other people.
Mm,
You stop being who you authentically are because that's not the person you feel somebody else wants. So
mm,
you try to be what they want. I mean, this is a silly little illustration, but say you really want to go to Mexican for dinner and somebody else wants to go to Chinese. And so you give up on your Mexican instead of coming up with a thing where like, let's go to Chinese now. And then later in the week, we'll go to Mexican. Let's do coming up with some mutually beneficial agreement. You just give up on that and just do Chinese, all the time. And it's like you just squelch your desire for Mexican. I mean, that's a silly little example. There's a lot more important things than that. But and then also you can hide that. You can hide who you really are.
I was gonna
And
say there's something else that like masking. My sister and I were just talking about that yesterday of how exhausting it can be to put a mask on.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're constantly burying the truth, hiding the truth, whatever. You're not being your authentic self. You're not being true to yourself, to the gifts you've been given, to the purpose you feel, to your values. And it's like, boy, it's hard to suppress that. Like they say, it's like holding that beach ball underwater, with your emotions and your thoughts and whatnot. So that can be really difficult. The fifth one, and really, you're putting their happiness above yours.
Yes.
Uh, the fifth one, and this is true of a lot of us, is we're really uncomfortable with conflict.
Mm,
Um, I see this especially on teams all the time. I see they tend to either be very conflict oriented, and then people want me to try to help them understand each other and deal with the conflict, or they don't have any conflict. They're deathly afraid of conflict, and so they don't come around the table and go, okay, let's just put all of the ideas on the table and let's sort through them with no judgment, and let's see which idea makes the most sense. Whoever makes the most compelling argument, that's what we're going to go with. It's not a competition kind of thing. It's like, that's not conflict. It's trying to find the best idea so we can move forward with that.
absolutely. I agree.
And yeah, so I mean, that's a big thing I see all the time. And sometimes people will be mad at you, even if you're right. Even if you make the most compelling argument, they still won't like it, because it wasn't
Exactly.
there. So, but I mean, you gotta be okay with that. You gotta be okay. I'm gonna do it the most kind and gentle presentation I can, the softest delivery. And then if they still don't like it, well, there might not be anything I can do. I've just got to be okay with me, even if they're not okay, and let them work through that. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. Number six is taking responsibility for another person's feelings. It's
Uh,
like, who knows what might be informing their feelings? And it's probably a lot of factors other than you, but you can sense where they are. And you think that everything you do, you're walking on eggshells because you don't want to make it any worse. And so that's a difficult way to live.
wow, that's a really validating one because I always used to do this with my mom. And again, has nothing to do with her. Oh, well, at least I don't think. I don't know. Who cares? I always used to take responsibility for her feelings. And that was the conversation that we had like a few days ago was like they wanted me to apologize for my mom being hurt. And I wanted them to apologize for me being hurt for so long. And it was like I was like, neither of us are going to apologize because actually neither of us are responsible for how we felt. And like we apologize for little things that contributed to it getting to where it was. But that is so validating. Is like I don't need to apologize for being myself and then you being offended for like just being myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And when you're saying that, I mean, it sounds to me like that's the possibility for a really meaningful discussion. It's like, forget about apologizing for right now. Let's just focus on understanding. So how
Exactly.
how did you feel, and why did you feel that way? How were you hoping things were going to be? Let's just again, the two fists, open them up and come into some understanding when you understand what's inside. So, and then maybe something will come out of that. But don't I wouldn't focus on the outcome of that first, or you wouldn't apologize for that. It's like, let's understand what are we dealing with here? What's actually going on that's causing the offense and whatnot.
Exactly. I think my point is just like if you are in a conversation with someone and they have this emotional reaction for so long, like a prolonged misery because of of that confrontation, it's not your fault. Like you know what I mean? Like it's not your fault that they went into a spiral or whatever they did. You know what I mean? It's at some point it's not your fault anymore, you know?
Right. So, and even when that's said, so I mean, a lot of things, even once I realized, okay, it's not my fault. I didn't create that, but I'm like, what did?
Right.
Why does this exist? Let me, if it's somebody I care about, let me try to understand what's going on there so that I can understand them. I can have some new insight, and maybe that'll give me some new ideas of how to interact, or some thoughts to bring to them that might be healing and helpful. It's like, let me try to do that. Let me get to the why. Like Simon Sinek says, start with why. Let me get to the why is this existing. Forget about blame, and just find out, why is it existing, or what is it, why is it there, and let's see, how can it be healed.
Yeah. So instead of people pleasing your way out of it, you can just have a healthy conversation instead.
Right, you're coming from like a very secure attachment style. You're not reacting emotionally, you're responding strategically with understanding and with some insight.
Yes.
I think that's where we want to get to.
Yes. There's 10 of them. What are the last three?
No, there were eight. So
Oh, okay.
there's two more. So and again, this goes back to what we're talking about with the locus of control. It's external validation. You're looking to be validated by another person or the people around you or your circumstances. And so what is it? Again, I go back to the why. Why are you feeling that way? What is it that's looking for validation? Let's understand it and then not look to the people around us to provide that. And it's hard when you got something that's really meaningful to you and you really are certain of the answer and nobody else gets it. Nobody validates that. Nobody
Yes.
understands. It's strange, but sometimes we have to live with those things. And then a lot of times what I find anyways is that there are other people who I didn't even know of who are thinking those along those same lines who my thought can be a help to.
Absolutely. That is a very good thing, a reminder to give yourself when you're seeking external validation and needing someone else's good opinion or validating your opinion. You need someone else's opinion to do that, is what I meant to say. But I see this a lot because I teach people how to trust their intuition. And it's like if you don't trust yourself fully, you're always going to be seeking external validation because you're constantly asking for a second opinion if you should do this when you can consult other people, but it doesn't have to be their word. It always should be your decision at the end of the day. You know what I mean? If you're, making a decision and you're going to other people to try to make that decision for you.
Right. I don't want them to make the decision for me. I want them to give me good input, so
Yes.
that I can have something good to, if it goes into my decision, base my decision on. And, it reminds me too, back to that thing with the cross. I don't know if I can do it with the screen in the background, but, it's my true identity, meaning a world that can't understand.
Mhm.
And so sometimes, I've got to deal with those different crosses. Now, I mean, it's not like being crucified, but I mean, it's like it's a cross. It's hurtful, it's heavy, it's difficult. It's where my true identity puts me in a situation that other people can't understand. That's not easy. But
And
and then I don't want to let it make me react emotionally. I still want to respond strategically and help them as much as I can with that insight that's whatever is informing me.
exactly. I used to have I have my screen, what's it called? A wallpaper like on my lock screen on my phone. It says, "You no longer need to seek validation from a world that doesn't have the range to understand who you are."
Mm.
And that was such a good reminder because sometimes people just won't fucking get you. And like, that's okay. They don't have to get you, you know?
Right, they don't. And then sometimes, people grow to a position where they can. I mean, because at one time, I mean, I didn't know that I was just out there wild and crazy and making crazy decisions and stuff. So I mean, we do grow. So even though I feel that like I'm that way at the moment, that people don't understand, the world doesn't understand me, and that's not going to define me. It's like I can still hold out hope that somebody's going to grow to the place I'm at, and that we're ultimately at some point in the future going to be on the same page and have a shared understanding.
Yeah, I love that. That's really amazing. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. So one more. The other one is if you're hurt, you don't speak up. And I don't mean lash out. I mean just address it in the kindest way that you can. And so like, well, when you said that, yeah, that really hurt my feelings. It's that made me feel devalued, that made me feel minimized, that made me feel whatever it felt. It seemed condescending or whatever. It seemed cold. It seemed like you didn't care. And yeah, and I value you caring. So it can also open up a real conversation if you speak to those things, not just from the wounded, emotionally lashing out place, but from a desire to really have a reconciliation kind of place, and to get on the same page again.
Absolutely. I think so with all these people pleasing tendencies, can they be developed just like attachment styles? Can they unhealthy attachment styles? Can they be people pleasing be developed from childhood or from past circumstances and you're still carrying on these behaviors in your present?
Oh, Absolutely. I mean, people pleasing has been big for me because, my mom was the youngest of 9 children. By the time she came along, her mother had lots of physical issues going on, and the older children were out having all kinds of issues and stuff that her mom. So she was really kind of abandoned. So she brought a lot of that. I didn't know that at the time, but she was looking at me going, "Oh my gosh, I just really want connection and attachment and whatever." And I was like, "That's a lot." So I didn't want to do anything that made her feel more that I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I didn't want to do anything that made her feel more that way. So looking back on it, I can see that a lot of the decisions I made weren't building myself or growing me personally. They were just trying to make her feel good and please her. So
Yes.
yes, we can definitely take those things on, and we can continue that way before for a long time before we actually realize what's going on until somebody daylights that and makes us aware of it.
Absolutely. And people pleasing, I think, can show up. I was thinking about this as you were talking. Can they show up in all of, in anxious attachment, in avoidant attachment? Because I feel like if you are an anxious attachment style mostly, you tend to people please because of why. Like, can they show up in both? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, they can. So, I mean, avoidant is the one that first comes to mind. And it's like you're avoiding doing anything that you think is going to rock somebody's boat, and that is a form of people pleasing.
Right, right,
Now
exactly.
the anxious is more worried about, I mean, and that could be easily too. It's like so say an alcoholic father again. I mean, that's a common illustration, unfortunately. But so it's like somebody might be like overly compliant and do things that they shouldn't have to do to try to calm that person down and please them and placate things and create a safe environment.
Right, and at one point, those behaviors made you safe, but now they're not serving a purpose, right?
Right. Now they're sabotaging you.
Right. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I for my last question, because my other question was, what are the psychological roots and motivations behind people pleasing? I think you kind of explained that, right? Do you want to add anything else on that?
Yeah, it's just you're just trying to control your external situation because you think that your internal happiness is based on it. And so in this, it specifically applies to the other people. You're trying to control them by trying to make them happy with you so that you can feel that you're accepted, loved, whatever, without conflict, and that you're okay. But it's
Wow.
really very selfishly motivated, even though you think it's about making the other people happy. It's really about trying to make yourself happy.
Wow. That is, I want everyone to rewind and listen to that 10 times and get that through your head.
Most replayed.
Most replayed from this time to this time. Um, what impact does people pleasing have on relationships, self-esteem, and personal boundaries? Is there anything else you want to add on there? Just so people can understand the gravity that this can have on your life.
Yeah, yeah. So for as far as relationships goes, I might need to get you to repeat that list again. But so for as far as the relationships, you're not giving a very sincere, authentic person to the relationship. So the person that the other person thinks they're relating to isn't really you. So it's kind of a very fake relationship and a very thin, hollow relationship until you can get to that. So okay, so that was the first thing. Impact on relationships. What was the other question?
Self-esteem. How can it impact your self-esteem?
Oh Lord. Well, that's a topic in and of itself. But so for the self-esteem, so you're always feeling like what I actually am isn't important enough to honor and to bring forward. Nobody's going to want it. Nobody's going to like it. I don't like it. I just need to be this thing I'm not, be something different than what I actually am in order for other people to be happy and to have peace in my life. And so you're really devaluing who you actually are. Now, that doesn't mean you have to present who you really are in an aggressive way. You can present it in a really kind, truthful, helpful way.
Absolutely. And then the last one was personal boundaries, which
Well, I would say with people pleasing, there really aren't any personal boundaries. It's just like I often say, my wife and I like this show Heartland, and it's about this horse ranch. And, I never see them take a prize jumping horse or something and just put it out in a pasture with no fence and just hope it doesn't wander off or get stolen. It's like, but when you're doing this, you really don't have a fence. You're not saying, no, okay, this is a healthy way for me to be treated from other people. You're saying, no, that doesn't matter at all. It only matters if I can try to make them happy enough to get the result, the from them that I want to try to feel happy. You've got no boundaries. You're not saying, no, this is oh, this is an okay way to treat me, and this is not. And I need you to respect that. And so you're not putting any of that in place. And you're just going along with whatever. You've got no boundaries.
Yeah, and this has been so huge for me because being such an empathetic person, you give, and there is no boundaries, but there's a balance you can have. You can be giving and kind and compassionate and want to make people feel good, but you can also be open to receiving the same thing back, and you can come from a place of not anxiety or not avoidant. You can come from a place of genuine wanting to please people because you're a good person. And I think there's a balance between the two. When you're a very sensitive person and very compassionate person, you can also have boundaries up that are like, no, I can actually say no sometimes. And I can, because I have a threshold, I'm not going to burn myself out. And I can, be open to being pleased back, So I love that.
Right. And I think that, and this is my last comment here, I think that one of the things that can really be helpful is a lot of people, as they've gone through life and discovered things, they can then take the discoveries that they've come to and bring them to other people and help further their growth. Maybe they would have come to the same conclusion eventually, but you can help speed that up and help them have a better life. So, it's not that you just got to run around doing a bunch of things for everybody, trying to make them happy. You can take the insight and the wisdom that you've gained through your own difficulties and bring it to them. And not everybody's going to receive it. I remember I heard a conversation with this one Jesuit and his disciple, and he said, well, I used to try to help. He said, but that didn't work out very well for me. And the disciple said, well, what do you do now? And he said, well, now I reign, RAIN. I just reign out what's in my heart from my experience, from my insight, from the wisdom that I've gained. He said, and some of it falls on rock and just runs right off. Other falls on dry land becoming fertile, and other falls on fertile ground.
Mm.
And I'm like, that's good, and I've thought about that with religion too. It's so much of it is just people running around trying to do this and that and the other thing. And it's like, it's not helping anybody. It's just wearing you out and just giving them a free ride versus taking the wisdom and the insight that you've developed over years and you're bringing that to them. And some of them might not want it at all. Others it might help them, and others, they might be ready for it. And it really makes a huge difference in their life.
Yeah, I love that. This was awesome. What a great conversation. You're so full of knowledge.
This was fun. I enjoyed this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely think I should have you on way more times and we can get into like PTSD first of all
Oh,
and more like religion spirituality stuff because I think it's interesting what you think about the three heavens and like the Akashic field and stuff too.
right? Isn't that an amazing thing? Yeah, I first heard about that on a sitcom, and then I started looking it up, and I'm like, wait a minute, I think I believe in it too. And then when I found out that like Edgar Casey and whatnot, he's got a book written about the book of life, and I was like, well, let me think about that. Yeah, when the Bible says book of life, does it mean that there's just this giant leather bound volume floating around in the sky somewhere? I'm like, I don't think so. I think a book is a record. It's a record of things. So my every word, action, thought, motive, and attitude is recorded in this eternal realm, and there's a lot of that I don't want to deal with. I'm really
Yeah.
glad that's cleansed out. So that's why I look at that, matrix stuff again. So that's why I look at that cleansing of that, because I don't think that the supreme being wants me to wear my dirty boots on his clean white heaven. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I love that. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate and review Divine Gossip 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Um, Jeff, can you share where people can connect with you more or work with you or anything else you want to share?
Oh, sure. So my email is Jeff Byrd, that's with a Y, Byrd, jeffbirdcoaching.com. And my website is jeffbirdcoaching.com. So you can reach out to me at those places. We can, if you need individualized coaching or group coaching or team trainings and things. Like I say, I love, I don't always get as deep as we got today in things, but a lot of what we talked about informs like the team building, the communication, the leadership, those types of things that we do get into, and just developing a better team, developing more empathy, more connection, better communication, better understanding. That's a lot of what I deal with the teams are. So feel free to reach out. That's what I love to do. So let me know.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, Mac. Thanks for having me. This is a great conversation. And yes, I do look forward to more conversation. This is great.
Yes, I love it. Okay. Bye, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to rate and review Divine Gossip on whatever platform you listened in on. Head to the MackenzieCollective.com to work with me further. If you have any questions or have any topics you want me to cover or any guests you want me to have on, please email all of that to info@themackenzie.collective.com or go to the episode description to fill out my Google form. I love you. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.